even if you're brand new to reading, if you can read for 30 minutes a day, that's about 20 pages. For me, that's 15 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes in the evening. So you break it up, 2 10-page reading sessions, 30 minutes. You do that 5 days a week, you've read 100 pages, 20 pages a day, 5 days a week, that's 100 pages a week. Simply by replacing a little bit of social media in the morning and a little bit of Netflix or HBO or something in the evening. So for $20 and a few hours of your time, you can learn what a multimillionaire knows about money. I mean, there's no better investment than that. And what happened was, within a few books, I read that book, I read a few other books on financial management, personal finance, and investing. I went back to school and I was leading those discussions my senior year about money. I was going to say, maybe I have a book recommendation for one of your monthly book club focuses. So,
Oh, absolutely. It's on the list now. That's for sure. My real education really didn't start until after high school. My high school sweetheart and I, we split. We had been together for almost half of our lives at that time. And when we did split, I found myself lost and didn't know which way to turn. It was at that moment that I started to find and discover books. I hadn't really read a book since high school. And so I dived into reading everything I could get my hands on: personal development, business, anything that I could do that I felt would help raise the standard that I could show up. And similar to my guest today, I divided this self-help into all these different genres, and I just devoured as many as I could. But here's the thing. While it started me on the path, finding out who I was and who I am as a man, it didn't necessarily make a great change in my life. And so today, my guest is going to share his experience, not only of reading, but also of becoming an author and what we can do to take the lessons learned from these amazing books. Now, before we get into that, I just want you to know that being a man today has never been more challenging. And so that pain for many of us can be very real. And it's a pain of loneliness and unworthiness. And we're masking this through anger and resentment. And it's all because we're uncertain and afraid to take that next step. So if you're tired and fed up with where you are in your life, then I'm going to encourage you to start your hero's quest. Become more, accomplish more, and live more than you've ever done before. Go to members.theawakenedman.net and start your quest today. With that, let's get on with today's episode.
The average man today is sleepwalking through life, many never reaching their true potential, let alone ever crossing the finish line to living a purposeful life. Yet, the hunger still exists, albeit buried amidst his cluttered mind, misguided beliefs, and values that no longer serve him. It's time to align yourself for greatness. It's time to become a revolutionary man. Stay strong, my brother.
Welcome, everyone, to the Revolutionary Man podcast. I'm the founder of the Awakened Man movement, Alan DeMonso, and your host. Thank you so much for being here today, everybody. And I just want to start our interview today with asking you a couple of questions today, just for the audience. How many books have you read in this past year? And do you read for pleasure or purpose, or maybe a little bit of both? In our group mentoring program, our group reads a book a month on a topic for that month and also follows an annual theme. It's a way to help men get into the personal development space and in a way where they can learn and grow with other men. And we are in an area where there is no lack of information, right? Like there's tons of information all around us. But what we lack is a plan or a purpose for living at our growing edge of life. Well, today my guest is going to share how he transformed his life from reading to being an author, and he's going to show us how we can possibly do the same. So allow me to introduce my guest. Nick Hutchison is the author of Rise of the Reader, Strategies for Mastering Your Reading Habits and Applying What You Learn, and the founder of BookThinkers. It's a growing 7-figure digital marketing agency that serves mission-driven authors. And at the age of 20, Nick discovered the world of personal development and quickly used the books he was reading to improve every aspect of his personal and professional life. Now, today, Nick has dedicated his life to helping millions of readers take action on the information they're learning and to rise to the potential. Nick's podcast, BookThinkers, life-changing books, features captivating interviews with world-class authors such as Grant Cardone, Lewis Howes, and Alex Hormozi. And during these insightful discussions, Nick delves into the pages of their books, uncovering practical, transformative takeaways for his motivated audience. Welcome to the show, Nick. How are things, brother?
Things are great. Listen, there's no place that I'd rather be than spending some time with you and sharing what I've learned about how to take better action on these books. So I'm excited.
Yeah, right on. And I just loved reading about your story and how you came to be at this point. But I always ask all my guests, our very first question is always about your personal hero's journey, your quest. And so tell us about that time in your life when you knew things had to change. What did you do about that? And how was that experience shaped you into the man you are today?
It might surprise your audience looking at my background, but just like you, I was not much of a reader growing up. In fact, I hated my high school education and even most of my college education. I was being forced to read books that I didn't like. I was being penalized if I didn't agree with my teachers. And so it created a very love-hate relationship with reading. I mean, I think I was interested in it, but I just didn't fit within the construct of my classroom. And so that continued up until my senior year of college. I took an internship going into my senior year at a local software company. And my boss at the time introduced me to the world of podcasting. He was a great guy. His name is Kyle. He's still alive. And Kyle said, yeah, you know what? He sort of realized that I had all this unfulfilled potential. I was this cocky 20-year-old kid who thought he knew everything. And so on one side of the spectrum, I had developed this ego because of sports, and it would represent itself at the expense of the people that I was around. I wasn't a lot of fun to be around, frankly. I was too competitive. I was too aggressive. I was too emotionally reactive. But on the other side of the spectrum, I also was hiding a ton of insecurities. So I had a lot of communication insecurities, a lot of social anxiety. And so if I was outside of just my friend group where I was way too ego-centered, I was way too insecure. Like I couldn't stand in front of a classroom and present or anything like that. So Kyle sees all this potential. He sees this ambition and he recommends the world of podcasting. I had about an hour commute each way that summer, 5 days a week to this internship. So I started crushing these podcasts, a whole bunch of different shows where a host would interview a series of guests and the guest would talk about what they did to become successful. And what I noticed very early on was that many of these guests, they were giving at least some credit for their success to the books that they were reading. And so I just kind of had this moment, which maybe it's easier to articulate today than it was back then. But I had this moment where I realized if I deliberately chose not to read these books and follow the advice of the people that I wanted to be like, then I was deliberately choosing to live under my potential. And as a competitive, ego-driven guy who cared a lot about what other people thought, I said, let me go find out what these books are all about. And I have not turned back since. And where the story gets a little bit better is that very early on, book after book after book, I started to remove ego. I started to remove insecurity. I started to replace the ego with this idea of being of service to other people and how it was more fulfilling. And I decided, to remove the insecurity and replace it with certainty and fulfillment and confidence. And so, yeah, these books have done everything for me. And, that's one example of a moment of my life where things were kind of tough and things got a lot better pretty quickly.
Man, I love that story because it does resonate so much with me. And, that point in time in my life was I just turned 30 and, everything ended for us. Right. And that's not what I had dreamt. I had dreamt that we were going to be, high school sweethearts and right to the end. And then when that didn't happen, I needed to find myself. And we look, and it was actually, I met a lady and she ultimately ended up by becoming my wife, and she introduced me to books. And actually what she introduced me first was Jack Canfield's cassette series. Now I'm an old guy, so there was still cassettes, but Nightingale Conan you could get the 6 cassette box set, of Self-Esteem and Peak Performance. I got to tell you, I wore that thing out. Just listening to it in the car, I had it at one point. I had that thing memorized, and I just needed that piece of, like you were saying, that lack of confidence in a tight circle. You wouldn't know any different, but getting outside of that circle and expanding who we are, man, that was a struggle. It's just so difficult. And so your story really resonates with me and how that has transformed your life. And so let's fast forward to where we are today. What's alive and real for you right now?
Well, today I have 10 people on my team at BookThinkers. We support hundreds of authors a year, helping them promote and market their books. I have a podcast, which you mentioned in the introduction, where I get to interview so many of my favorite authors and spend time with them, ask them follow-up questions to their books, get to know them a little bit better. And then, my very first book, which I was just showing you before we press record, Rise of the Reader, is launching November 1st. And so, yeah, I'm in this space where I enjoy the passage of time. I really love my life. I feel like I am of service to my community on Instagram and the other platforms. We do about 1 million impressions a month. And I believe that the right book at the right time can change somebody's life, especially if they have the right tools to implement it. And so that's my mission, man. They say your purpose comes from your pain. Books help me solve a lot of things in my life. And my purpose is to help other people realize that these books are so powerful. And so that's what I'm doing. I just got married earlier this year. And so, yeah, it's been a busy time, but it's a good time.
Well, congrats on the recent nuptials. I'm sure with everything you've learned, and your wife is probably in the same mindset as well. You guys will do phenomenal as a power couple. So great to hear.
Yeah.
Cool. Now, obviously, you've read hundreds of books, but there must have been one or two books that really rocked you to the core. I know for me, I had that experience for sure. So why did that happen for you, and how did that change your life?
Well, as I started listening to all of those podcasts, commuting to and from that summer internship going into my senior year, so many of those people gave some credit, like I said, to the books that they were reading. And they would always say the first book they read. And I heard some similar names over and over and over and over again. One of them was Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. And so what was interesting about that book for me, which ended up being my first book, but the reason I decided to read it was because I was a business student who didn't know anything about money. And so that fear, that anxiety, it would get triggered in the classroom setting when kids would start to talk about how much money they were going to make after college, or, these big jobs they were going to go get, or they would use language around financial literacy and investing that I didn't understand. So when I heard a lot of other successful people, successful meaning financially successful people, talking about how they started their journey with Rich Dad, Poor Dad, I was like, I got to give that a shot. So I dove into that book, and I had aha moment after aha moment. It was the very first book I decided to sit down and read. And I'm happy that it was, because if I wasn't so captured, I'm not sure I would have continued to read, because again, I was not a reader just like you. And, Robert Kiyosaki and Sharon Lechter, the two authors of that book, they talk about how money as a subject is typically not taught in the school system, which means that not everyone is on an even playing field. It's taught in the home. And if you come from a poor middle-class family, you will learn poor or middle-class money habits. And so to break that cycle, you have to learn from rich people who have condensed decades of their lived experience and their financial literacy understanding into days of reading. So for $20 and a few hours of your time, you can learn what a multimillionaire knows about money. I mean, there's no better investment than that. And what happened was, within a few books, I read that book, I read a few other books on financial management, personal finance, and investing. I went back to school and I was leading those discussions my senior year about money with confidence, because I had the language to understand how it worked. And so, yeah, that's kind of like the origin story of BookThinkers, because now I just believe that you can go out there and solve any pain, solve any insecurity, or develop any skill set with these books.
Completely agree. There isn't a problem that society doesn't have that a book hasn't been written about. And I think the challenge for us is that we struggle with making that connection. And I know for me at times, as I started to pick up books and read more, was getting caught in the trap of, well, this was written like in the 20s. Like how relevant is that today in the 90s or the 2000s? There's lots relevant, because people are people. We don't really change much. Yeah, our technology improves, different things around us improve, but our mindsets, I found anyways in my journey, is that we still tend to struggle with the same things as we did in the turn of the 19th and the 20th century. And here into the 21st, we still all have similar problems. They're just shaped differently. Or have you found that as well in your journey?
Yeah, I'd say we're still facing the same problems that we had 2,500 years ago when the Stoics first started journaling and writing. I mean, I'm a big fan of Stoic philosophy because it's an actionable philosophy and it's meant to help you on a day-to-day basis solve normal problems.
Yeah.
And the same problems that these early Stoic philosophers were writing about are still things that we deal with today. And so I had this like neurobiologist on my podcast the other day, and he was talking about sort of it was talking about how our brains really haven't evolved in the last 50,000 years. I mean, the environment has evolved, but our brains really haven't evolved 50,000 years. So yeah, I think we still have the same insecurities and fears. We're applying them to new places, but yeah, it's still the same kind of basic foundational issues. And so when you hear somebody like Marcus Aurelius, I don't remember, maybe he's like 300 AD or something like that, writing about the same issues 2,000 years ago, basically, that we're dealing with today. I mean, it's funny, but it's also not funny because most people haven't figured it out. And it's been thousands of years of the same problems.
Isn't that the truth, man? Isn't that the truth? It's been said that we're no wiser if we can read than an illiterate, right? And so if we choose to not read, then we're not doing ourselves any service. So what would you say to someone who isn't reading today, that you from so many years ago, and to move them forward to get the idea and really grasp that reading is where you can really improve your life?
Yeah, just like you're mentioning, I think that reading is one of the most underutilized skill sets that we all have and choose not to use. So on my bookmarks, I have a Mark Twain quote that says, "The man who does not read good books is no better than the man who can't," which is very similar to what you had just mentioned.
Yeah.
A couple of things. So sometimes I'll hear people say, well, I can't read. I'm not a reader. I can't read. And I'll always ask them the following question. If I paid you $10,000 to read a book by the end of the month, do you think you could do it? And they're like, well, I could read 5, so it's not a question of whether or not you can read. It's a question of whether or not you value the reading enough to prioritize it in your schedule. So I love to provide the following example as far as math, to kind of start helping people realize it's not impossible. And then I'll talk about what books have done for me. So even if you're brand new to reading, if you can read for 30 minutes a day, that's about 20 pages. For me, that's 15 minutes in the morning and 15 minutes in the evening. So you break it up, 2 10-page reading sessions, 30 minutes. You do that 5 days a week. You've read 100 pages, 20 pages a day, 5 days a week. That's 100 pages a week, simply by replacing a little bit of social media in the morning and a little bit of Netflix or HBO or something in the evening. Not the whole activity. I'm not a robot, but just let's start to hedge our bets a little bit. Let's start to serve our future self and read a little bit. Most of these books nowadays, I mean, they're getting shorter and shorter and shorter. They're about 200 pages on average. So that's a book every 2 weeks. That's 26 different areas of your life that you can improve, or 26 different pains that you can solve over the next 12 months by just replacing a little bit of social media and a little bit of Netflix. That's a pretty easy and kind of understandable way to get it done. So let me talk about what books have done for me. I'm 29 years old now. I've read hundreds and hundreds of these books over the last 10 years. And I'm happy, I'm healthy, and I'm wealthy. I'm of service to people. I have a great relationship. I have no financial insecurity or scarcity mindsets. I'm confident. I'm working with the world's most amazing people. And I give 98% of that credit to the books that I read. Seriously, I do, because I'm not 29 years old. I'm thousands of years old, because these books condense decades of somebody else's lived experience into days of reading. It's a shortcut. It's a life hack. It's a strategy for improving your life. These books solve problems. They help you develop skill sets. So if somebody listening today is still convinced that it's not worth their time to read a book, I'll give one final example. I'm a small business owner, and last year I read a book called $100 Million Offers by Alex Hormozy. And I went into this book. The author was basically making a promise saying that I could 5 or 10x my average deal size. I'm like, by building a better offer. I'm like, well, that's pretty cool. I have a small business. Let's see what I could do here. So I go through the book. I apply the exercises. This is a $20 book, and it only took me a few hours of my time. Okay. That's the investment. What I learned in that book helped me generate an additional 6 figures of revenue in my business within a handful of months. So a $20 book in a few hours of my time led to over $100,000 worth of additional revenue into my business just by changing a few things. He knew something I didn't. I applied it and it worked. And so again, these books can change everything for you, whether it's your health, your relationships, your personal finances, your happiness, your headspace, your mindset. They do everything. And when I see people choose not to read, it bums me out.
Yeah, absolutely. And what a great example of with Alex's book. And I know he's coming out with the $100 million leads now as well. And so that'll be another great one as well. And the quote I wrote down here was, I'm not 29 years old, I'm thousands of years old. And what a great framework to put when consider the types of books that we've read, or both of us have read, and anybody that chooses to dive in. We don't recognize the amount of knowledge and wisdom that is being imparted to us if we take the opportunity to read and really apply what we're reading. And today's books for sure are really geared that way, with lessons and little exercises and I think that's what makes reading far more enjoyable. And I think that was what I noticed, the transition from books that were written many years ago, 50, 60, 70 years ago. They weren't necessarily in that format, but today, man, with the way books are structured, there's no reason why you can't get through 2-3 books in a month, really. And so I just think that is just phenomenal. Go ahead.
I was going to say, maybe I have a book recommendation for one of your monthly book club focuses. So,
oh, absolutely. It's on the list now. That's for sure. I was doing a little bit of research coming in here, and I didn't realize this, but as of 2019, there's about 15,000 self-help books published annually. That's a lot of books, right? And so if somebody was going to get started, and sometimes as guys, we get this idea, well, I got to find the right book. What would you recommend for someone who's interested in starting to dive into reading? Well, what would you recommend for them to do?
I have a bunch of different thoughts popping into my brain, so we can go through them together. Number one, when you're first starting out, I do think it's important to pick a book, your first book, by answering one of the following questions. Is there a pain that you're experiencing on a daily basis that you could overcome by reading about how somebody else overcame it? Like something that just bugs you on a daily basis. And Jordan Peterson, in his book Beyond Order, he gave the following math example for something that bugs you on a daily basis, and it's always stuck in my head. So he says, over the next 30 years, if you're experiencing something daily, you follow the math, 30 times 365, you'll experience it about 11,000 times over the next 30 years. So take some time to read about how somebody else overcame the problem. Maybe over the next 30 or 50 days or something like that, you overcome it, and then you avoid the next 10,950 experiences, right? Life doesn't have to be so hard. The right book that helps you overcome some pain can save you a lot of pain in the future. Or is there a skill set that you need to develop to get to where you want to be in life? We all know there's a difference between where we are today and where we want to be. So spend some time thinking about that skills gap. Do you need to be more confident? Do you need to be a better communicator? Do you need to manage your personal finances more efficiently? Do you need to lose weight? What's that look like for you? And read a book about that problem. And so what I'm essentially trying to say is set an intention for the book. When I read a book, I love to follow the SMART goal framework. So I love to set a goal that is specific, measurable, attainable, meaning realistic, relevant, meaning I'm emotionally tied to the goal and it solves a problem or develops a skill set, and time bound. So Alex's new book, $100 Million Leads. Some people are just going to read that book and hope that it changes their life. For me, I just started the book. I set a SMART goal, a SMART intention to find and implement at least 2 lead generation strategies for my business, BookThinkers, because we stink at lead gen, by the end of September. That is specific. It's measurable. I know whether or not the book served its purpose. It's attainable. I didn't say make $100 million by the end of the month. Just find and implement 2 things. It's relevant to my business because we stink at lead gen. And I gave myself a deadline for implementation, the end of the month. So that's setting an intention for the book. You're emotionally connected to the outcome Therefore, you're emotionally connected to the process of reading it and finishing the book. So that's kind of one way that I'd answer this question. The other thing that I want to say is, if you're already bought into personal development, you've just started your journey, the first book you read helps you solve a problem or develop a skill set. I think when you're first starting, it's more important to read wide, to read a lot of books, to see what resonates with you, what writing styles work, what types of authors, what types of material. And as you continue your journey, you can start to get a little bit more selective. But when you show up, just figure it out. Get a little crazy, read a bunch of stuff, follow your recommendations, whatever you're talking about on the show regularly and in the book club, as part of the membership. And then once you know exactly what you need help with, you can get a little bit more selective and focus on depth instead of width. But that's not that important when you're first starting.
I completely agree with that sentiment. And that's exactly what I did. I would, I really went wide, and, I wouldn't get a book. If I wanted something specific on personal development, there's probably 5 different authors I was reading at the same time just to get a different perspective. And while there's lots of similarities, somebody will say something, the same point, but in a different way, that all of a sudden I get it. And I think that's such great advice for people to really understand that we can, that breadth is more important than depth in the beginning. Once you, like you said, once you find your author, and I love reading Jordan Peterson's stuff too. And it's a little heavy. I call it heavy. It's a little heavy, just the way he writes. So, but man, it's just chock full. Every line is like there's something to make a note of.
Yeah,
you talk about in your book the rule of 25%. So tell me a little bit about how that works, and why did you choose 25? It could have been 50, 70, 80. Why'd you do that?
Sure. I watched a video way back in the day where I think it was Tai Lopez being interviewed. Tai Lopez is an internet marketer. Most people don't like him. He's a little cocky, but you can learn something from one of the world's best internet marketers. And so I was watching a Tai Lopez video, and he talked about something slightly different, the rule of 33%. He said you should spend 33% of your time with mentors, 33% of your time with peers, and 33% of your time with mentees, people that you're mentoring. And I thought there was something missing there. I thought, what about time with yourself? That's really important too. So I decided to modify his rule of 33, and I call it the rule of 25. So spending time with mentors, people who have done what you want to do, and they've helped other people get there. I think that's what defines a good mentor. And you can't always spend in-person time with those mentors. So you've got to read good books. You've got to read books about those people. You've got to invest in their courses, podcasts they've been interviewed on. You've got to understand what made that person successful in any area of your life. Doesn't matter how you define success. Follow their path. Again, like you talked about, our human experience is not unique. Billions of people have lived before us. Millions of them have written books, and thousands of those books are probably a good fit for you. So start to read, start to spend time with mentors. Peers. I mean, it's said that we are the average of the 5 people that we spend the most time with. And for me, I want to spend time with people who challenge me, who provide constructive criticism, who call me out, who hold me accountable. I have a whole section of my book about accountability groups, and I think they're very important. Peers are somebody who they're fighting the same fight. And I think it's really important to spend time with them because it's kind of like mutual celebration, a lot of, encouragement, hand holding. And again, it just feels good to be on a team of people doing the right thing. 25% of your time should be spent mentoring other people. I think it's really important to refresh the fundamentals, but it's also really important when you read something, when you learn something, to rework it in your brain and present it to other people. That's a form of repetition, and it strengthens your retention. So that can help you learn more efficiently if you're learning to teach other people. And it feels good, to give what you've had to other people, just like you're doing on this podcast and in your membership group. And the last bucket, the one that I added, 25% of time by yourself. I don't remember the quote exactly, but there's this quote that says something like, all of man's problems stem from his inability to spend 15 minutes by himself. And it's just this idea that, we neglect mindfulness in this fast-paced society. Spend time meditating, reading, journaling, reflecting, thinking. thinking about your life, observing it from a third party perspective. And there are tons of other activities and habits that I recommend in the book on how you can spend some time by yourself. But I love myself, man. And I love spending time by myself just as much as I love spending time with my wife. I'm not scared to be alone. And I think that's happened through practice. And so, yeah, I love that kind of framework because it helps you evenly distribute your time between different things that help you in different ways.
Yeah, and I think what really the real power in that is adding that 25% for ourselves. And I think at times we're in, especially as men, and we focus on men's work, obviously with my work here, is we're so much into the giving mode and doing mode that we forget that we need to give ourselves that time and that same type of passion, and so that we can do well for ourselves. And when we don't do that, that's where we start to fall down and we break down, and it's such a struggle for us guys. And so I'm grateful that you were able to take that framework and add that piece and really put that into it, because I think it's so key to our development.
Yeah, me too.
You talked about, there's a little bit in your book also, and I mentioned it briefly here, but there is a bit of a dark side or a downside, I'll say, to self-help books, right? And we can fall into this trap. And so what's the one thing that you talk about in your book about this downside, and what would you recommend to people we can do to mitigate that challenge?
Yeah, I'll say trust but verify. I think what I've realized is that most of these authors, they're out there to help you. And most of these authors, they've had some type of life experience. They want to go serve their younger self, right? Their purpose comes from their pain. They're writing about how to overcome some type of problem. But there are some bad actors in every area of life, more in some areas than others. But I think in the world of personal development, there are some snake oil salespeople. There are some people who are just out there to take your money and sell you into a course. They don't provide action steps. They just provide motivation and inspiration, which does serve a purpose for some people. I mean, I've learned from some people that others don't really enjoy that much. But I say trust but verify. Believe that most of these people are just optimistic out there trying to help. But do your research behind the scenes. See what other people are saying about them. If a book sets unrealistic expectations, for instance, and says that you'll make $1 million by the end of the month if you read this book, don't read that book. That's not realistic. But if somebody does help you with first principles thinking, foundational stuff, it's probably a better book. Realistic expectations. Sometimes too, and I think this happens a little bit in the men's space specifically, is that the books turn into a form of procrastination. The books become more exciting than actually doing the work yourself. And so as far as dating is concerned, a lot of men read books about how to go to a bar and ask a girl out, and they visualize it and they think about it and they get the best pickup lines, and then they never actually go do it, right? They'd rather spend the time thinking about it in their heads and getting that short dopamine hit when they visualize a girl saying yes or something like that at the bar, and they never go out and do the work, right? These books become a form of procrastination. So there are so many people who read books on entrepreneurship and then they don't start businesses. There are people that read books on dating and they never ask a girl out. There are people that read books on diet and they never actually lose any weight. And it's because they don't put the books into action. They become a form of procrastination because the author, they just write about all this inspiration and visualization and they don't encourage action. And so, those are a couple of the things that I write about in the books. I mean, there are definitely some downsides to the self-help industry, but I owe literally everything that I have, which I think is great, to the books that I've read. And so at the end of the day, there's more good than bad.
Oh yeah, absolutely, for sure. And thank you so much for bringing those 2 points forward. The one about avoidance, and because I caught myself in that trap earlier on, right? And I think part of that journey, as we start to read and we're learning through our pain, is that it's to be able to take that action step, and then going back to your 25% formula, and having that mentor to help you move you through, and that accountability group really gets you to take that next step. And so for sure, I wouldn't be where I am today if it wasn't for the self-help book industry and, authors like Jack Canfield and Warren Bennis and all the folks that I read to get me to that next level. And so there's so much more for it, but to watch for that trap of avoidance well, I'll just read another one. I need one more book before I take action. You probably don't need to read another book. You need to take some action and then decide what's the next book to read to solve that next challenge on your journey. So in writing this book, what surprised you the most about it?
Well, what surprised me the most was how hard it was to write a book. I've worked with hundreds of authors in some type of paid capacity, and I've read hundreds of books. And I just thought, because I'm a disciplined person, I could probably sit down and bang this out in a few months, right? No, it didn't happen like that for me. It took me about 3 years to take what I was doing and translate it into something that's legible for somebody else, and action steps to follow. So yeah, writing a book is tough, and I have more empathy, respect, and understanding, I think, for my clients at BookThinkers, because we help authors promote their books. I have more understanding and empathy for those people, and because I realize now how much work goes into it, I also feel bad for authors that spend a bunch of years learning something, spend a bunch of years writing something, and then nobody buys their book. And it is useful. It's not the best written books that succeed. It's the best selling books that succeed. And so you've got to get out there and sell your book if you want it to go anywhere.
Yeah.
So that surprised me a lot. The other thing was that I was doing so much subconsciously or automatically that I had never named or defined, right? Like it took me a while to kind of observe my own behavior and say, how the heck do I implement books? Because this is not a subject that's typically written about. Like, there aren't a lot of resources for it. So I was doing all of these things to implement books, and it took me a long time to translate automated action into awareness, and then take that awareness of the action and then detail it.
Yeah, man, that makes so much sense, right? Because when something becomes we embody it, and it's ingrained in our day-to-day life, then to be able to get that out on paper and be able to articulate that plan. But I got to tell you, going through the book here for this interview, you've done a phenomenal job of structuring it. And so I think this is going to do wonders once it gets out there.
Thank you.
Along the way, you must have had lots of people asking you questions, maybe a couple of mentors. What's been the most powerful question you've been asked, and how did that affect you?
I think the most powerful question I've been asked is, what are you optimizing for? And I've applied that question to dozens of areas of my life. Let me give you an example. When I first started reading books, it was all about the number of books I was reading. And so because of that, I had to define what counts as a book that I've read. And for me, that was every word of every page, even if it was a bad book. I could not put a book down. And then once I asked myself, what am I optimizing for? I'm optimizing for results, not the number of books I've read. That's a vanity metric, right? So I stopped reading a book if I didn't like it or if it wasn't going to serve me. I could put a book down if it served its purpose in the first couple of chapters, and I could take action, and I didn't need to read the rest of the book, right? Because I wasn't optimizing for the total number of books read being defined as every single word. I was optimizing for real life change. Yeah. So that's one example, and then more recently, when I think about that question, what am I optimizing for at a macro level? I'm trying to enjoy the passage of time. And that means doing more of what I enjoy, more of what brings me energy, and less of what doesn't. And so the way that I've been applying that recently is every couple of weeks, I'll look at an entire week's worth of activity on my calendar, and I'll go through and I'll color code it. Green, if it brought me energy; yellow, if it was neutral; red, if it took my energy away. Anything in my calendar. And I try to automate, delegate, eliminate, outsource anything that took my energy or was neutral. I only want to do things that bring me energy, because that helps me enjoy the passage of time. More of what brings me pleasure, less of what brings me pain. And so that's another example of how I've been applying that question.
Yeah, I love that stoplight theory for optimization. Is it's simple. It's right there. You can, you don't have to go get an app for it. It's pretty easy to implement. And so
yeah,
that's what's awesome about that. What's been the best piece of advice you've been given, and how has it served you?
I think the best piece of advice. So early in my entrepreneurship journey, BookThinkers was still a side hustle, and I wanted to make the jump. I wanted to jump from my full-time job that I took out of college into the business full-time. And I had a mentor tell me that slow and steady wins the race. He said, don't jump off the cliff and try to build the parachute on the way down. You'll operate from a place of scarcity. You'll compromise on your values. You'll make bad decisions. You'll run out of money, and then your business will die. Don't do that. Keep your full-time job so that BookThinkers can survive over the long term. You know, Michael Gerber, in his book, The E-Myth Revisited, he says 95% of small businesses fail in the first 5 years. Why? Because they run out of money. And so for me, BookThinkers failed over and over and over and over and over and over and over again over the first handful of years. I poured tens of thousands of dollars of money, hundreds of hours, with some other people too, who joined me at different points of that journey, and it just continued to fail. And it wouldn't be where it is today if I wasn't reminded that slow and steady wins the race. You want to minimize risk. No matter how many times you read Aesop's fable, The Tortoise and the Hare, the tortoise always wins every time. You always want it to change, but it doesn't. You know, and all of the overnight successes, like I've interviewed so many overnight successes on my podcast, there's always a backstory that people don't highlight. There's always years of suffering and pain and trial and tribulation because, again, 19 out of 20 small businesses fail in the first 5 years. Yeah. So I think that slow and steady advice, that's probably the best.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure. Obviously, as a reader and an author now, what book is currently on your nightstand?
Yeah, I mentioned it a little bit earlier. I just started $100 million Leads by Alex Hormozy. And Alex, what's so cool about him is he writes at a 3rd to 5th grade reading level. And so he takes these really, really, really complex business subjects and he just dumbs it down so that they're so easy you can't help but take action on them.
Yeah, I love Alex's work for sure. You know, Nick, of everything that we spoke about today, and maybe there was something we didn't get an opportunity to touch on, what would be the one takeaway you'd want our listeners to have?
I'll end by saying that if your audience has not read The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying by Bronnie Ware, or if you haven't read it, I highly recommend that book. Bronnie Ware was an end-of-life palliative care nurse who would spend the last couple of weeks, maybe days, with somebody as they transition from this lifetime on to the next. And she would spend time talking with those people. And she realized that the vast majority of people end up regretting 5 major things. And I'll just share the top one, which is that they live lives based on other people's expectations of them instead of their own, like what really fuels their fire. And so for me, I spend a lot of time thinking about death. I spend a lot of time making sure that I don't end up regretting not having done more with my life, not having lived more, not having helped more people and been of service and spent more time with my family, experienced everything that life has to offer. And so I constantly think about death. And, you know, one of your first questions was like, how are you living right now? Like, what's going on? And I think the last point could be about death. So we could go kind of full circle through the timeline. You know, don't live a life of regret. Don't live under your potential. Take advantage of these books, follow the roadmap, and read that book for a little bit of extra motivation, The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying.
Absolutely, for sure. That's such a great book. It's one I'm gonna have to pick up and reread again because that's a great reminder. You know, I just want to say thanks a lot, Nick, for spending time with me today. And we've been able to share and lay a bit of a breadcrumb path for those of us that haven't been reading to be able to get back to start reading, and those of us that are reading to think about reading with intention and purpose in order to get the most value out of our books. So if people are interested in getting a hold of you and maybe there's an aspiring author or work with you in some of your other programs, what's the best way for them to do that?
One of my favorite things to do is play this book matchmaker role where I provide custom book recommendations to people who need them. So if you're listening today, if you're watching today and you'd like a custom book recommendation from me, DM me at BookThinkers on Instagram. It's spelled just like it sounds, BookThinkers. And tell me about a problem you have that you just can't get rid of. Tell me about a skill that you want to develop, what your dreams are, where you want to go in life. I'll probably ask a few follow-up questions, but I will provide a book recommendation. And better yet, I will act as your accountability partner. I have the whole spreadsheet system. I love to follow up with people in a few months after I make a book recommendation and see what they thought. What was their intention for the book? Did it serve that intention? It's one of my favorite things to do. And from there, in the links in our bio, you can find links to our website. If you're an author and you want to set up a discovery call with us to learn more about our services, help so that we can help promote your book, you can do that there. And you can find links to my book, Rise of the Reader: Strategies for Mastering Your Reading Habits and Applying What You Learn, and everything else in my universe. And I just wanted to say thank you. I mean, I'm somebody who tries to focus on gratitude as much as possible. It's a subject that we didn't really talk about today, but it's another one of my favorite things. So thank you for hosting an awesome podcast and for giving me the chance to share what I've learned over the last 10 years reading and implementing these books.
Oh man, it's great having you on the show, Nick. You're providing so much value for everyone, and I get so much out of having my guests on, especially folks such as yourself who've been able to take things that they've read and put them into action and have something that they can now give back to the world. It's truly a hero's journey, and I appreciate you being on the show. Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to the Revolutionary Man podcast. Are you ready to own your destiny? To become more the man you are destined to be? Join the brotherhood that is The Awakened Man at theawakenedman.net and start forging a new destiny today.